Today we are going to be discussing the difference between modernism and fundamentalism in religious ideals and expression here in America. And fundamentalism we would describe simply as the original doctrinal ideals of most faith communities, especially the Christian communities within America. The idea that God is sovereign, that there is a blessed Trinity, that man has reliance upon Almighty God for his every needs, that the Bible is the sacred writings, the sacred message of Almighty God himself, as expressed through the human authors. All these principles we would consider fundamentalism, the very fundamentals of religious expression. Well, in the early 1900s, this expression began to be challenged by the modernists, by those who would say that, well, in America, we can challenge these ideals because we think that the idea of reason, of intellectualism, of man having dominion over man, rather than God having dominion over man, is more important. In particular, the Scopes trial, or many call the monkey trial, where literally the religious ideals, the fundamentalist ideals of religion were put on trial. The principles and the expression of evolutionism was put against Christian principles. John T. Scopes, whom the trial was named after, was a public school teacher who taught evolution in his class. Recently, Tennessee had put in a law prohibiting the teaching of evolution, and he went ahead anyways and taught evolution in his classroom. On July 16, 1925, the New York Times stated that religion and evolution was on trial, and they did not know how it would end, but it was an interesting time for all Americans. On May 17th, earlier in the year of 1925, John Scopes stated that, quote, "I didn't know I had started anything," close quote. And he went on to further claim that, quote, "as long as I am in the midst of it, I am willing to stay," close quote. And it's interesting here because Scopes clearly sees that he has a vested interest in what's going on here. He has the idea that evolution is a principle that should be taught. So therefore, he wanted to go to the end and see how this would go. On July 4th of 1965, the New York Times states that and this was a recap of the actual trial, and they state that the whole point of the trial was to legitimize, if you will, modernism, the changing values of America, this melting pot that was gradually changing from a Christian nation to a very religious, syncretic nation, in a sense, where we would push science against religion. And I think this is the major point that needs to be made here, is that this whole fundamentalist versus modernist ideals and ideas were simply to challenge the structures of Christianity in America. And it's very important to understand the biblical principles in the study of history, point number 8 from Liberty University, that, quote, "The Bible teaches all men to recognize their human limitations. Faith and reason are not opposed, but rather complementary. We must remember this as historians as we study history and we perpetuate the teaching of history as well."